Alpha One Drop Zone presents Honoring Our Veterans, a series of interviewing our military veterans. Our purpose is to reconnect our country with our veterans and our history.
Well, Rip, you were born in Tennessee, is that right?
Yeah, in the very western part of the state, Lauderdale County, which joins the Mississippi River, as far west as you can go in Tennessee. And Lauderdale County is about 50 miles north of Memphis down the Mississippi River.
Now, when did you first think about joining the military, Rip?
Well, growing up in Tennessee, I didn't have any friends that give me any main lead toward military. But what was interesting to me is during the Depression, a lot of people, particularly young black, looking for escape, joined the CCC camp and would go out west and come back in uniform. And boy, just the fact that they had those little tan uniforms on after being back there was always quite attractive. So I guess if there's any lead toward military was influence that I had was the Civil Corps of Engineering that people would go out to western part of the country. In fact, a lot of the work in Kansas was done by the CCC program during immediately after the Depression. And that uniform was the closest thing I had to maybe influencing me in the military, because those young guys would come back and boy, the girls around home thought they were very sharp.
Yeah. Can you tell us, Rip, once you enlisted, where you went, where you served your basic training and so forth?
Yeah, well, actually, just lead into my going into actually joining the military, during World War II. And in high school, my last year, knowing that my next step was going to be required to go in the military, I decided to try to get in the Army Air Corps, because I had observed from my not local newspaper, but paper that was distributed in our local area, from the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier, that they had some black people flying airplanes. And I had wanted to fly airplanes from my early age, and I thought, well, boy, here's an opportunity. So my first interest into the military was to get into the military early to get a chance to fly airplane. So the start, I went to Tuskegee to try to go directly into the Army Air Corps, because I found out that's where these people of color was learning to fly, only to find out that that wasn't the place that you could join. And I came back to my home base then, as I was instructed, and tried to apply to get into the Army Air Corps, and was sort of laughed out of the federal building in Memphis when I walked in and told them I'd like to join the Army Air Corps, because they didn't know of the person there that was in charge, hadn't heard that they were allowing black people to fly airplanes even. So after that little deal, I found out that I'd have to go back there to take the test, or I could get directly into the service from my home base. So I went out and off to volunteer my service to the military till I could get into the Army Air Corps.
Now, what base were you stationed at, and what state was that in, Rip?
Well, after I thought that I had made a volunteer to go into service, I only found out that I'd been moved up on the draft list to an early number, and I was sent in as a regularly enlisted person who had been drafted into the military. I wasn't aware of that for several years. But when I reported in and went through the preliminary tests and told them that I wanted to join the Army Air Corps, they considered that I had some potential maybe of being a little bit above the average. So they assigned me to be in the Army Air Corps, but it was a service unit that I was assigned to in Greenville, Texas. And the base was just at its opening. We were the first unit that arrived, one of the first units that arrived on that base, Major's Army Airfield at Greenville, Texas.
Now, what particular jobs did you do there? What was your service there at the airfield?
My first military assignment was waiting tables, serving the food to the white cadets who was in their secondary part of their training called basic training at Major's Army Airfield, flying an airplane called the BT-13. And these people were based, and they would go to the mess hall, and me as one of the service unit would serve them their food. Now, this was my first assignment as a military person hoping to fly airplanes, and found out my job was a waiting table for the white people who were learning to fly.
I assume, Rip, you probably were impatient about not being able to fly airplanes. Did you think about requesting assignment to another base or doing anything else in the military?
Well, no, my first step was knowing that this was a possibility. I requested an opportunity to take all the necessary testing to see if I could meet the qualifications to be assigned to Tuskegee. It wasn't a matter of another base. That was the base for the primary training if I was going to go to, as a black person, was going to go to flight school. So I did get an opportunity to do the testing, to take the necessary testing, and they agreed that I met the requirements that I could possibly fly airplanes. And the results of this, I thought I was on a waiting list to the first opportunity to be transferred from this service unit to Tuskegee. But they did give me a little bit of movement because of that. I was moved up to the flight line as a fuel truck driver that would drive the fuel truck around from airplane to airplane. And oddly enough, a fuel truck driver was rated a fuel truck driver, I guess, because was not allowed to even put the fuel in the airplane. The white mechanic who serviced the airplanes would be the one who would take the hose and put the fuel in the airplane, and that was my first move up from waiting tables.
So you kept waiting to be called, and then what happened after the next few months or so?
Well, not just a month or so, back in the past year, I remained on the flight line, and one of the things, if there's anything that was very helpful and exciting, being on the flight line, I was able to get a chance to apply for trips with the senior pilots who were the instructor pilots. If they were going on a trip and had no student pilot going with them, you could get a ride to different places wherever they might be going for a weekend or overnight. So I did get a chance to get a number of rides in the airplane, and really created my interest to get a chance to be a pilot. But I'm still putting fuel, driving the fuel truck, getting ready, thinking that I might be coming up on the list to go to a flight school. And this was after more than a year, and I was fortunate, I guess, to meet and get to know some of the white service people who were actually servicing these airplanes. They would put fuel in them, run the airplanes up, check the engine, and make sure that they were okay for flight for the student and instructor pilot. So they were very familiar with the airplanes, and I found that there were more than one, but I don't know how many, that of these people who also had applied for flight schools, and of course they could have gone to any flight school that had a primary flight training program, where I could only have gotten a good chance to go to Tuskegee because that was the only place for the beginning of the primary flight training. So after several of these people had gone to, that I had met, had gone to flight school, one of the people who knew that I was on the list went down and found that he was getting ready to go to flight school. And he came back and passed the word on to me that he had asked what my schedule was on transfer, and they told him that my schedule was that from the commanding base commander to never be transferred to go to flight school, because he didn't think that flight program was something that should have been started in the first place for black.
Oh. So you ended up in the infantry in Italy, is that correct?
Yeah, well, after I got this message that I was on a hold at that base, I thought the opportunity would be then if I could get transferred to another base, maybe it wouldn't have that same situation. So by that, I went down and made it very clear that I wanted off that base at the earliest date. And I was given the opportunity to leave within about 3 weeks, but it wasn't going to another military base, it was to the infantry.
So you were in Italy, is that correct?
Well, that was after an extended amount of training.
After your training to get...
Because when I was transferred to the infantry, they found out that I had never had any basic training. I didn't know anything about ammunition, guns, or anything else. So I had to go through a basic infantry training, and they sent me from Fort Benning, Georgia to Camp Livingston, Louisiana to go through my basic training there, because when I found myself transferred to the infantry, I first requested that they put me in the airborne unit. I knew at that time they had started an airborne unit, that's parachute unit. If I couldn't get in flight school, maybe I'd get up there and jump out of the airplane. Yeah. But since you had to have the infantry training to be in the parachute unit, they sent me to Camp Livingston, Louisiana to get my basic training, back to Camp Meade, Maryland for advanced infantry training, and from there to Africa and to Italy, and I ended up at the end of the war. I was in the northern part of Italy on the move up, but never got sent up as a replacement on the front line.
Rip, so when you came back after the war, I'm sure you was anxious to become a pilot and go through training and so forth. I know we're about ready to close the interview, but I just want to tell you so many things you accomplished after the post-Tuskegee era. Of course, it's in your book, Black Horizons, which I think everybody should read. It's an awesome book. I remember when I started, I couldn't put it down. So you became a pilot, you started your own business, and also you became a politician, here Wichita City Councilman, and also state senator. So that's phenomenal what you've done in your life. And so the war, did it change you a lot when you came back?
Well, when I first came back, my first experience was heartbreaking because, as you mentioned, I did learn to fly, but I went back to what was basically my home after the war in western part of Tennessee. And I went to one of the civilian flight training facilities there to join in my military flight training on my GI Bill. And I hadn't got to have military flight training. I thought I could do it on my GI Bill. So I was turned down there at my home location in Memphis to again get a chance to even enter a flight school. And I thought then I'd been turned down basically when I tried to get into the Army Air Corps there in Memphis at the Experimental Building. Now I've gone out and spent 3 years in war and come back and get turned down immediately after the civilian flight training. My question was, when are things going to change?
So eventually things did change, and you're a fighter, you're a pioneer. You just always looked ahead of your life, what you could do and accomplish, and God gave you talent. So we thank you for being with us today. Thank you again, Rip, for your service. And once again, your book, Black Horizons, you really get to know Rip Gooch by reading that book. Well, thank you for your time, Rip. It's a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And one correction I'd like to make for you.
Okay.
I certainly was a pilot, but I never became a politician. I was an elected official, but I found out the hard way that politics were not what I wanted to be. And I tried to serve the people as an elected official, and I think I did the best I could. But my decision was I couldn't make it to be a politician.
Okay. Well, thank you for those comments. But take care, Rip, and God bless, and thank you very much.
Right.